Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's meeting. We have a very, excuse me Keith, we're going to leave that open. Oh, that's a little bit funny there. Thank you. Yeah. Welcome to tonight's meeting. It's Monday, November the 15th, 2010, and our speaker tonight is David Brown, and David is going to talk to us about trams in Perth. There's a book that he's had a lot to do with. It's on sale actually now, and I believe it's a magnificent book. And David is the man probably mostly responsible for the book. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce, I must mention David's brought his wife Olwen along as well, so welcome Olwen too. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Mr. David Brown.
Thanks very much for inviting me to the meeting tonight. Just to mention at the beginning, this is the book that I've just finished editing earlier this year, and had to wait till I retired before there was enough time to do that. We got a Lotteries Commission grant to help us with this too, though I mentioned earlier, and we thought it would cover a fair bit of the cost, but as the years went past, we found more and more about the Perth tramways and more photographs to put in there, and so the book grew, and so we finished up with all of this. So that's the book there, but I'm not really here to sell a book. I'm here to talk to you about Perth trams, because something that I like doing, and share with you some of the things that I've found out in the course of editing the book, because we had three contributors, and I should mention three authors: Tony Culpepper-Cook, Adrian Gunsberg and Ian Playdell. All three of them were born in Western Australia. All three of them now live in Victoria. And they have done for about 30 or 40 years, and they've been collecting material on tramways. Maybe it's because Melbourne still has trams that they've decided to settle over there. In fact, Ian Playdell drove the trams in Melbourne for a few years. This wonderful colour photo was taken by Tony Culpepper-Cook, one of our authors, in 1958, and we thought really that showed great foresight to think, gosh, in 40 years or so there's going to be a book that would go nicely on the front cover of. So there we go. So we're looking back, and I like to think what we're looking back at is young Perth. You look backwards and you often think, well, that's old Perth or old wherever it is you're looking back at. But really this is young Perth, and we're going to be tracing a lot of the things in the development of Perth, starting not in its earliest days, but still when there wasn't very much to it. The photo here is taken from one of the very few tall buildings in Perth in 1885, which was the Town Hall. And this is looking more or less north towards the railway station. And so this is Murray Street along here. Pretty easy to see, there aren't too many high buildings blocking things out as we're going along here. That's a bit of Barrack Street coming up there. This bridge is at the end of Beaufort Street, and you can see from that, although it's right at the edge of the picture there, we can maybe get that slightly more on, but there's not much more of it. It doesn't line up. So originally that bridge at the bottom of Beaufort Street came to a dead end at Wellington Street, and you had to do a turn and then go into Barrack Street. And that was a bit of a problem. The bridge was rebuilt in 1893 or thereabouts in more or less the present S-shaped thing, linking up those two streets. But they didn't do a very good job because they didn't anticipate there were going to be trams going over it in a few years' time. It had to be rebuilt since then more than once. But that's how it was originally. 1885, and it's very convenient to start here because 1885 was when the first tram proposal was made for Perth. And there's not much of Perth, is there? It's amazing to think that people would come up with the idea of putting trams in Perth when that's all there was of it. They took some views in different directions as well. And when I say the town hall was one of the few tall buildings in Perth at the time, there was another one up there, the cathedral, St Mary's Cathedral. This is looking along Hay Street to the east, or more or less to the east. And again, Perth doesn't go all that far in that direction either. So that's how it was in 1885. There's a few more of these views as well, but you can see them if you persist and search in the Batty Library online photo collection. There's a whole lot of them in there, what they sum up as. So in 1885 there was a proposal from some people in Subiaco. Now there wasn't much to Perth in 1885 and there would have been even less at Subiaco, but some Subiaco businessmen, they haven't changed very much. They wanted to have trams in Subiaco, but nothing really came of that. This was the first concrete proposal. This is in 1889, a chap called Lehman came up with this proposal for 4 tram routes around the Mounts Bay Road, up William Street, James Street, Fitzgerald Street, and some others as shown there. And of course, a very important destination out here is the cemetery. It was called Cemetery Road at that stage. I think now it's Bronte Street. I think that's what it's called at the moment, out in that direction. And in between, they had discovered that there was just no legal basis for putting tramways down in Perth. So various acts of Parliament were passed and made it legal for people to come up with proposals. And what you had to do was reach an agreement with your local governing body, which for most often was the City of Perth. You wouldn't get very far without a tramway that had the centre in Perth. So that was the main starting point there. Lehman couldn't raise enough money to do it, so he dropped out and nothing much happened until in 1897 Dickinson came along with a much more ambitious proposal. And of course there would have been quite a bit more of Perth by then, so you could come up with something a bit more ambitious, and he had a lot of lines. This one along Brisbane Street and up there went to, we call it Hyde Park today, I think that was called Fourth Swamp, I think it was Fourth Swamp, and that's where that one finished. So they did like to have their tram lines going, if possible, to places of amusement. A lot of Perth tram lines finished up, when the system was built later, they finished up in hotels at the terminus of the line. So that's probably a good reason for that as well. In a sense, a closed system, because all of these ones came together, these ones made loops as well. And so it sort of seemed like that's where they were finishing it, and that's where they were finishing it, and as if Perth was that big and wasn't going to get much bigger. Was the thing. They wanted a line across here along Kensington Street, which wouldn't have been a good idea because there's a railway crossing there. And eventually they didn't build a line along Kensington Street along that particular route. There was a line coming up Lord Street as far as where the subway is. That was planned to be done. Dickinson couldn't raise the money either. But along came the Perth Electric Tramways Limited, a company formed in England. There were a lot of English investors at that stage that were investing in tramway companies all over the world, South America, parts of Europe, various parts of Australia as well, and they all had sort of overlapping sets of directors. They were all loosely related in the people who came up with or floated these companies. So they thought Perth would be a good spot for one. And they came up with this map here, which duly went through Parliament, and that was more or less adopted as the plan for the first tramway in Perth. And that in fact is what they built, with the exception that this line along here instead came up and along Kensington Street instead of going across the railway in the earlier proposal. The Lord Street line, which is the one that later was extended through Maylands, they didn't take that as far. It only went as far as Lincoln Street along there. So that's pretty much the way it was built. Lost in history is this tram line along Collins Street, West Perth. That was actually built. There was a tram line along Collins Street, West Perth, and there was even talk of extending it over the road into Kings Park. So people, again, a leisure place that people can finish up at. And quite pleased to have the children coming to this part of Kings Park rather than the more tended part over here to where the trams would drop them off there, which was fine. So the Perth Electric Tramways Limited had to put up a deposit, but they could afford to do that, and so they started to build their tramway. And various things they had to agree to do. They had to put wood blocks down on the streets to within a certain distance either side of the tram lines. And then in the future they also had to maintain the tram lines. They had to water the streets because they're quite dusty, not all sealed like they are today. The tram going past would stir up the dust quite a bit, so they had to water them as well. So this is then putting down the wood blocks in the streets.
Blocks are often called Hampton's cheeses.
Really?
Yeah, well, he was the Premier at the time.
Governor.
It was a big city.
Hay Street West. Don't recognise that building there today. But as we go through some of these photos, and there's a whole heap more in the book, you see a lot of buildings that aren't around anymore, and some of them are quite nice looking ones too. So there they are, they've got their poles up, and you can see the wire for the tram overhead starting to be strung up there as they're going through. The other agreements that the Perth Electric Tramways Limited agreed to, they had to pay 3% of their gross revenue to the Perth City Council, and later on when they struck agreements with other local governing bodies like Subiaco, they did the same thing with those. Constructing, maintaining and watering the roads. There are also provisions in their agreement to hand over the whole tramway system to the Perth City Council at various stages, and it depended how long it was, whether it included Goodwell or not. So it was a limited concession that they had to run the tramways, which of course means that the investors had to get as much return out of the company as they could in a limited amount of time, and this affected how they ran the tramway company for a while. There are all sorts of difficulties with construction. Perth City Council, having agreed to it all, seemed to treat Perth Electric Tramways Limited as something of an enemy that was there purely to rip money out of the people of Perth, and so they had to get permission to do everything. Just to dig up the road to put the next bit of tram line down, they had to seek permission from the Perth City Council, and that committee only met every 2 weeks. So there were all sorts of practical difficulties, and when they removed material, it still belonged to the Perth City Council, so they had to store it, and Perth City Council used it elsewhere. Yes, so there were agreements with some of the other city councils as well. They weren't city councils, but other councils such as Subiaco, and they all decided they'd have similar agreements before much longer. But the trouble was then that all these different agreements all expiring at different times, and that was going to make the ongoing takeover eventually somewhat difficult to do. and the Perth City Council had rights to take over part of it, but the Subiaco Council had other rights to take over other parts of it at different dates. So it was all somewhat complicated in the way that it evolved. So the first tramway opened in 1899, and this is probably a good time for me to give this out. I could have read this without my reading glasses on, but to fit it all on one page, yeah, thanks. This is to give you a bit of an overview, as I go through the details, to give you something of an overview of the development of the tramways in Perth. And I've done this under a number of headings. The first column is general things that happened, and you can see in a reddy pink colour, the rest of you will see it when you get it in a moment, the 4 different bodies that were in charge of running the tramways at various times. As I've mentioned, there's the Perth Electric Tramways Limited from February 1898 they were formed. In 1913 the tramways were taken over by the government and run by the railways, so the WHER was in charge for a long time. From April 1949 the tramways became their own entity, but they ran the ferries as well. And then from 1958, what's left of the tramways and still the trolley buses were run by the NTT. So there were those 4 different governing bodies at various stages. The electricity supply was in there at various times as well, but I haven't mentioned that. We can't go into everything tonight. So to get to the stage that we've got here, the tramways built a car barn in East Perth, pretty much opposite where the Wacker ground is at the moment, at that end of Hay Street. They built a power station, which you'll see on a map that I'll show you a little bit later on. That was in East Perth. And they started with a fleet of 19 trams, and this is one of them. They were a yellow colour at first, but that frightened the horses, so they painted them red fairly soon afterwards. And then they didn't frighten the horses, obviously. You can see they don't actually have a headlight to start off with. There's a bit of a blob there, which they didn't paint, so they're obviously expecting to do something there. But they weren't fitted with headlights right at the beginning. But they did have this people catcher, which they would fold up when they're heading in the other direction, or kangaroos, yeah. And to start off with, they had little signs like that just dangling there. And you'll see as we go through in chronological order, the signs of the destinations gradually got a bit more sophisticated as the years went past. So the tram route ran from the car barn, which you can see in the background there in the corner, along Hay Street up to Thomas Street. And it had the branch along Collins Street as well. That was what opened first. And the fare was threepence. And that was the fare from end to end. And that was the fare if you got on one corner and got off at the next corner. No concessions, no reduced fares for going a couple of blocks, nothing like that, threepence, or you didn't ride at all. And that caused a lot of controversy. And they didn't really vary very much from that particular thing. But the tramways were extremely popular. And it wasn't long before the newspapers were full of advertisements using the tramways as bait or a positive selling point or something, whatever they called it those days. So the Subiaco tramways now in the course of construction and will be running by Christmas. And they did that first year, although it originally only went to Thomas Street, they extended it along Hay Street and up Rockaby Road to the Kings Park Gates by Christmas that first year. So before they'd completed all of the rest of the things on that original map, they'd gone outside their original agreement because they knew there were people over there in Subiaco and there'd soon be more people and they would hop on the tram and probably be happy to pay threepence to hop on the tram and get into Perth from over there. So this guy obviously has it all worked out, and I dare say he did very well. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what they meant by 50-foot frontage against the tram terminus, because there wouldn't have been too many frontages of the land of the tram terminus, but At least they put the total price there. They also had to get other agreements as they were doing this, because they didn't want the people, once they got to Thomas Street from Subiaco, to have to pay another fare when they popped over into Perth City Council territory. So they had to reach agreements that would be a single fare all the way through, and things like that. So, now they didn't start the Barrack Street routes for some time, but this was the scene down at the car barn. Here's the car barn, that's Queen's Gardens over there. That opened at around about the same time too. Again, another nice leisure destination at the end of the tram route. And there are a whole lot of the trams lined up in Hay Street. There's the car barn there. There's one of their water tanks they used to keep the dust down in the streets, but also they had to get the sand out of the groove in the tracks as well, so the trams could go over it fairly easily. And I came across this photo too, which is across Queen's Gardens. And there is the car barn in the distance over there. So this would have been just after it was opened and converted from clay pits. And the trees aren't too big there, but some of the swans are there. We couldn't use this one in the book because it came with all these ghost images. There's a sort of a boat of some sort there, and there's other stuff up in the sky, so we didn't get to use that one in the book. This says hotel, and I think that's the Ozone Hotel, the original Ozone Hotel that was at the end of Adelaide Terrace over there. So that's just a little extra, oops, too far. Now, this is the other bridge. Remember, we saw earlier that that first bridge at the end of Beaufort Street was over here somewhere. So this is when they shifted it so that it had an S shape. And it took them about a year to come to some agreement to alter the bridge enough so that the trams could go over it. And I've seen before pictures that don't really look much different. I don't know what they did to it. But later on in about 1907, they did a major job making the bridge about twice as wide as it is there. So it was about a year's delay before they opened up all of the routes going along Beaufort Street. And that particular one, if we zoom in a little bit, is you can see that's actually the Buller Street tram. So that's going to head up Beaufort Street when it got to Buller Street, turn left. And that was the name of the route at that stage because it sort of went along Buller Street and then stopped after a while. So then, on the 16th of November in 1901, this is from the west on Monday morning, but on the Saturday morning on the 16th, the tram route along Newcastle Street and Old Guildford Road was open for traffic. So that's the first part of the tram line that eventually came up to Maylands. And Lord Street at that stage was called Old Guildford Road. There's quite a lot of name changes on the streets in Perth. Really, it's hard to follow some of the old documents because you didn't know where the street was. You had to look back. And because of those funny signs they had originally, at night, you could tell these cars by having a red light with a white bullseye. And they say, quarter of an hour service has been initiated. And that didn't last all that long because before too long we've got documents saying that it's a half-hour service. So, this is what it looked like. Now, this is from a 1913 map. So, some of the things, for example, this East Perth line wasn't there. That didn't open until about 1905. But what happened is you have double tracks, that's the trams going in both directions, going up Beaufort Street. When you got to Newcastle Street, not labelled on here, but you have a single track tramway coming along Newcastle Street and up Lord Street as far as Lincoln Street. Now, considering that the tram company had to pay money to put all these things in the street where it had a tram line, there were certain financial reasons to put in a single track line if they could, rather than a double track. But it had certain disadvantages as well, because if a tram came up here and got to the terminus, you couldn't send another one along there until this one had turned around and come back and got down here again. So the amount of time it took a tram to get up there and come back down again regulated the amount of traffic you could have on that line. And if it got back there a little bit late, you might have the next tram coming along. Now what it had to do, had to come up there, and to get onto this line, it has to cross over to there, so it's momentarily heading the wrong way before it can turn along there. Now there's a lot of tram routes up and down that street, and waiting and then that manoeuvre could be a bit of a disadvantage for running the traffic on that. One reason there are a lot of tram lines going up Beaufort Street was due to the fact that they didn't use the Horseshoe Bridge for trams for more than 20 years after it was built. It was designed by a fellow who actually came to work for the tramways a little bit later, and it was like that because it had nice easy slopes for trams to go up. The tramway company wanted to use it and put their trams for leavable up there and up William Street, but the Perth City Council wouldn't let them because that wasn't in the original agreement, and the Perth City Council's pretty persistent when it wants to be, and that hasn't changed too much anyway. So there you have it. So what we have here is the leadable tram. It has come up William Street and it's turned right into Wellington Street, so it's heading down past the railway station. It's about to go over the Barrack Street Bridge, head up Beaufort Street and then turn left or west when it got to Newcastle Street instead of going straight up William Street there. So that was another reason why there was all this extra traffic, tram traffic on Beaufort and Barrack Streets, which didn't matter in the early days of the system because there wasn't much besides the trams to start off with. The horses have been scared away. So you didn't have to worry too much about any of those things. So the first 5 or 6 years of the tramways was one of massive investment and extension of the system. They opened not only the Lord Street route, they also in 1905 opened the line over the Causeway to Victoria Park. Bit of a delay there because at the Perth end of it they had to go over Perth Streets a bit, so they had to reach an agreement with the Perth City Council about the route they were allowed to take to join it up. That took a while to do. Here's another single track line going across the Causeway. Eventually they had a bit of a loop on Harrison Island. But basically there was one line going across the side. Again, not much other traffic, but in later years when there was all sorts of road traffic here, when it was heading back towards Perth, there was a line of cars coming straight forward in the opposite direction. So that got a bit awkward later on when the road traffic developed. There was a big shortage of trams. They started off with 19 trams. By the end of 1903, they'd added an extra 20. They got 5 of them second-hand from Kalgoorlie, where there was a tram company run by more or less the same governing company as the Perth ones. They imported a few others from overseas, and they also started to make their own trams. All of the trams previously had been imported and assembled in Perth. Now, this is Hay Street looking along, that's William Street going across where we are there. That's what was there before the Glen building on that corner on the right. And here we have 2 trams. Now, Hay Street's been one way for a long time, but in the early days and until about 1917, trams went in both directions, as did the cars. And the tramway company didn't really want to have trams going in both directions, and nor did the people of Perth. But Perth City Council said, that's in the agreement. You'll run trams in both directions in Hay Street. And at the same time saying, well, it's very narrow, we can't really have all this happening there. It'll scare the horses. but they did run them there. And the tram on the right there is of note because it's tram number 40, which was the first tram built in Western Australia. And now we're getting on to the sort of trams that people start remembering. They didn't finish up, well, they didn't change too much, but they did have at least some glass in some of the windows some of the time later on. And the ends were enclosed to protect the motorman when driving a bit, but that was the basic design. And this level here, that's the level of the seat that you're sitting on. So you must have felt fairly exposed, I would think, when you're going along in those. And it was either probably hot and dusty, or you pulled the blinds down and it was hot and damp and dark in there, I imagine. But they said that was built for Perth conditions. And by 1920, the tramway people had 54 cars looking like that, tram cars. So they're cheap and easy to build, and a lot of them were built at Middle Junction workshops, and they could do that pretty easily, and fairly light and cheap to run. So they finished up with 54 of them, but of course they couldn't carry
I mentioned moments there.
Sorry?
They mentioned of the fact that they drive from one end, and then they'd pull that stick,
the pole,
and walk around with a rope on it, and put it back the other way, and then drive back the other way.
Yes, that's right. That the trolley pole here, which went up to the wire that carried the electric current, you always had to have that trailing behind you. If you try and push it in front of you, that's going to have a bad effect on the overhead wire. So when you got to the terminus, pull it down, and the person would walk around and put it up on the other end. In the larger cars, they had a pole at both ends, so you just pulled one end down and put the other end up. And you notice along here, Perth Electric Tramways Limited, they put the name proudly on the thing there. So that one came along in about 1904, and then they built quite a few similar ones to that as well. And there's listed along here a lot of other tramway openings as well that happened in those first 5 or 6 years, and that was basically the tramways fulfilling their agreements, but also extending into the suburbs where they could. So there was an extension in Osborne Park, right along Scarborough Beach Road and up Main Street to Royal Street, tramways going up there. Victoria Park, although it wasn't a private company, it was a sort of separate thing where it went over to Victoria Park, and Nedlands Park, where they extended from the Subiaco terminus at Rockby Road and went down to the Nedlands Jetty area there. That was for land development and sales. And so is the Osborne Park one too. There were market gardens there, but they thought they'd get people to buy land up in Osborne Park as well. So it's the way those ones came about. The tramway company, however, got to the stage where they could, even after only 5 or 6 years, see that the end of their investment was coming up, and they were thinking, well, we've run out of capital, we really should be extending the tramways, but we haven't got any more money. They wanted people to invest more, but people who didn't want to invest more. They wanted the English investors that already owned the company to invest more. There was a bit of a stalemate. The trams were overcrowded, although they bought a lot more of them. Peak periods you still can get on the tram quite a lot. And they thought there should be extensions into new areas as well. So the fares, the lack of extensions and the overcrowding of the trams all started to tell against the company. The people of Perth have been pretty happy and proud of their trams to start off with, but they got a bit sick of the company after really a very short time. And so were the workers, because there was a major tramway strike in 1910. There'd actually been a strike on the first day the tramways opened, back in 1899 because the employees got along expecting to work for 10 hours, and they didn't realise that they had to work for 5 hours, then go away for 4 hours, and then come back to work the other 5 hours. That hadn't been mentioned to them when they signed on. They overcame that, but by 1910 there was an arbitration court ruling which set the minimum wage for tramway workers, and the tramway company then decided, well, that's the minimum. It doesn't say anyone else, that's not going to pay everyone. So everyone else's wages, who'd been used to getting a lot more, they were all reduced to this minimum amount. So some people got an increase because the minimum was increased, but more people got a decrease out of it. So they went on strike, and it's hardly surprising. An interesting thing, I don't know if it happened these days, that's Jack Scadden in there, who's soon become the Labor Premier of Western Australia. So I'm not really sure how many premiers of any variety would be walking along with strikers and supporting their cause. But the Arbitration Commission didn't do much to fix it, and various mediation attempts were held, and eventually Scadden was the one that came up with some solution that sort of satisfied everyone, and there's a whole chapter about it in the book. It's a long and involved story, very interesting, but we can't go into it now.
Just a question there, Scadden, I think he later, prior to World War II, he was Treasurer of West Australia. That's before the Federal took over the taxation of Australia.
Not sure he might have been.
I think I remember that. You know, talk about this Scadden.
Well, I imagine a lot of people did, but probably as many other people didn't. It's the nature of the political thing, I suppose. This is the 1913 map of the tramways, without playing it up too much, just to give an idea of the extent of it. There's the Newcastle line going up Oxford Street and up there to Royal Street, and lots of market gardens there. The trams actually had goods trailers that they would pull behind them and bring stuff from the markets back here. And the original city markets was pretty much where the Wellington Street bus station is now, and the tram line went there, so they brought all these fresh produce back and delivered them there. Although there were other markets as well, not only that one, but that was one of the main ones. It's an interesting shape of the building. So here's the line through Subiaco down to Nedlands Jetty. There's the line over to Victoria Park. The main line up Beaufort Street. At that stage, there's Alcott Street. That was the settled area. Not much up here. This was the more important line going up there, where eventually it reached as far as Blake Street along Alcott Street. And so the Lord Street bit was really very much a short branch out of in the whole picture of things. So they pretty much had to take what was left over, I suppose, in terms of the tram cars and things like that, because a lot of the other routes were more profitable and more passengers were there, so they put the trams onto those routes. So there's a little digression on single tracks, but we won't go into that now. No one liked the tramway company. The investors of the tramway company wanted to get a good return, but they didn't want to invest any more money, so it turned out they were willing to sell. And the question was, would it be bought by the WA government, which was known as nationalisation, or would it be bought by the Perth City Council and or some consortium involving those? Now, the Perth City Council was really keen to buy it, but there were negotiations for several years, and eventually Scadden was in power by then as Labor Premier, and he decided, well, we're not going to get agreement, I'm just going to legislate to take over the tramways for the state. And so they did, but of course that put the Perth City Council's collective nose somewhere out of joint, because they really wanted to own the tramways, and they didn't give up. They kept wanting to buy it for the next few years, but they weren't too pleased with Scadden, that's for sure. Scadden went on an overseas trip in about 1913 and came back with a couple of trams, as you do. And that was one of them. That's number 62, that was known as the Washington car. And there's also number 63, which was a rather strange looking shaped thing, which was the New York car. And they were supposedly adopting them for future use or evaluating them, but they didn't ever build anything like those two cars that Scadden brought back. But they kept using them because they couldn't afford to just scrap them.
One of them had a very nice cane web seat. I think it was one with a drop down in the centre.
Yes, 63, yes, that would have been
that was
one.
the elite car.
Yes, yes. Also didn't go around corners very well or anything like that. Tramway people didn't like it all that much. They couldn't afford not to use it because they didn't have all that many trams. So, and there it is, and notice very proudly, government tramways. And so it's part of the cell. The government was very proud of its tramways. Around about the same time, Scadden was very keen on state enterprises because there's a state meat works, state industrial works, state hotels, all sorts of things. The state would run, presumably if they weren't being run by someone else and they thought they were needed to develop the state, which is why they took over the tramways, because they could see they weren't being run very well.
It's interesting to speculate what would have happened if the City of Perth had taken them over. I don't think it would have worked very well because they wouldn't have been able to negotiate with anyone else but themselves.
That's it.
They could have done something like Melbourne, where they had a lot of separate systems, and then the thing called the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board came in to run it, which was made up of representatives from the different local councils.
Now earlier in Melbourne they had one of the largest cable tram systems.
They did, yeah.
And most exotic, which is now, everyone thinks it's San Francisco, but Australia, Melbourne had the largest.
Yeah.
But was that around the time that it was a state or a federated type, I should say? Because it was very big.
Well, the Tramways Board continued to run the cable trams for a number of years.
Oh.
They phased them out gradually with the most profitable routes first.
Yeah.
And then they found they'd run out of money to convert the other ones. So some of them hung on. The last one closed in 1942, the last cable tram route in Melbourne.
The whole problem with those cables, that ran down the centre of the roadway, and of course push bikes lose the wheel in it.
You do lose your wheel in these darn things.
Brakes, you put the brakes on and skid anywhere without them.
You learn to jump them and take them riding.
In Adelaide, when they had that cycling race, the Tour Down Under, they cover over in Glenelg, they cover the tram tracks over with tar or something like that while the bike race is on. So it's probably no need to do that. So the system was in a very poor state when the government took it over. A number of people did reports into the tramway system. There was the Somerset report. Somerset was the last general manager of the tramways company. He did a report to the government which was very frank. The Short report, Short was the Railways Commissioner in 1912, although the Railways didn't take over for a bit longer, they knew that's who was going to be running it. And then a chap called Mertz did a report too. He was from goes to sleep if you don't do something. He was in Melbourne advising them on electrification of their railway system at the time, so they called in Perth and gave a lot of good advice about the WA tramways. Now, Scadden had made a lot of promises to do with the new tramway system. He promised more trams. He promised extensions into new areas. He promised cheaper fares, penny sections and things like that. He'd also promised better wages and condition for the tramway men. He still had to maintain the 3% payment to the Perth City Council because he couldn't get it through Parliament otherwise. Still had to maintain the roads, which increasingly were used by the competition, namely buses and things like that. All this had to be at no net cost to the state budget now, And of course now the people of Perth, instead of having a company to blame that was based in England, had the government to blame if things weren't going as they thought they should. We all like to blame the government. It's a lot closer to doing things. The immediate things that they had to do was actually rebuild the system pretty much completely. Somewhere in here I've got the report from Somerset saying what needed to be done, as well as lots of extensions. He said there needs to be a new power station. There needs to be a new car barn for 50 cars erected somewhere near the Beaufort Street routes, being the very heavy route. There need to be feeder cables to feed the current into the tramway system at various points. And the tracks have to be rebonded. The current comes in through that, goes through the motors, and then the current returns, completes the circuit through the rails. But that meant you have to have metal things joining the rails, so there's a complete circuit. He was saying that had to be redone. A lot of the tracks needed to be relayed. All of those single tracks, of course, got twice the wear because trams went on them in both directions. Point work, portable crossings. He also suggested that there needed to be, in Hay Street, there needed to be stables and urinals, things like that, built as well. Now, that's from the General Manager of the exiting tramway company, and there's a note here on the letter, signed JS, presumably Jack Scadden, because it's gone to the Minister's office, saying, I think it would be as well to pass this on to the Commissioner of Railways, who will eventually control and report to Cabinet, and then says, P.S. These proposals were made to the company. So the company knew what needed to be done, but just let it go, and left the government to spend all of the money to fix it up. So far from doing all of those extra things that they needed to do, extensions and things like that, they had to rehabilitate the track, put in a new power supply, and they did manage to get a couple of line extensions in those years. They were hampered a bit in getting the new power supply because they had ordered a lot of stuff from Germany and the war came along, and so they had to think again, and that delayed them for a bit with their new power station. So it wasn't until about 1917 that they had the new power station and things could proceed a bit. As far as penny sections are concerned, Perth City Council wrote to the Honourable Minister for Railways in February 1918. I beg to inform you that at the last meeting of the Council, consideration was given to the inauguration of penny sections on the tramway service, and it was resolved that the Government be requested to constitute the penny section of Hay Street between Bennett and Barry Streets, and various other things. So that was 5th of February. 26th of February, from Perth City Council to the Minister. I shall be glad if you will kindly favour me with a reply to my letter of the 5th East. 23rd of March. I shall be glad if you will kindly favour me with a reply to my letter of the 5th Oct. 8th of May. Relentless, the Perth City Council. Kindly let me have a reply to my letter of the 5th of February. So eventually, in reply to your letter of the 5th of February and further reminders, I have not replied to you earlier as I was desirous of obtaining a full report on this subject so that I might have an opportunity of considering it from a comprehensive viewpoint. After carefully perusing the study, he has to advise it's not practicable to make any alterations at the present time. And he then goes on and says that the experience in other states is quite against these penny sections. Adelaide had them and had given them away. Sydney, which they said was a very well-run tramway, they had them and they've given them away. But it's just not practical to introduce penny sections. Can't be done. However, by the 5th of December 1919, they've been introduced. And there's a letter from the Minister of Railways, which at that stage was Scadden again, to the Perth City Council. Dear Sir, I have to acknowledge receipt of your letter of the 20th Oct conveying the thanks of the Council for the installation of the penny sections in the tramways, also asking that further extension should be made. In reply, I have to advise you that I very much appreciate the Council's letter of thanks. I notice the City Fathers are thus giving evidence that they are concerned about the morbidness of their ratepayers. Might I suggest to them that one method by which they could be of great assistance would be to adjust the charges for electric current to something near an equitable figure. I feel sure you will pardon my impertinence, but my only desire is to render it possible to reciprocate your very kind congratulations. So Scadden and the person Council going at each other again with that little exchange. The new trams that they did build, when they went building those 54 small ones, from then on looked more or less like that. That's the standard looking Perth car. They got modernised a bit over the years, but they're all the same length. They had some differences, but that's the sort of configuration that you had there. And those ones were built in 1917, and they built quite a lot more in the 1920s as well. And the 1920s became really the tramway heyday in Perth. You had new lines opening up to South Perth, Claremont and Bayview Terrace. Now the people shown there, that's in Stirling Highway at Lock Street. And there they are welcoming the new tramway service to Claremont. And those are the brand new trams that they'd introduced for that service as well. And that's a bit of a look at what the central city looked like at that stage. It looks fairly reasonable, but in fact there were a lot of problems with traffic in the central city, largely due to the great number of tram routes going along Barrack Street. They had at least got rid of the William Street ones. They opened the Horseshoe Bridge to trams in the early 1920s, or early-ish, but that still left another 4 routes going over there. And they had some problems. Here's a handwritten note. The trouble with police at times of trot loading. Inspectors have had great trouble, that's tramway inspectors, have had great trouble in working the trams to advantage. Many of the older police are all right, but men just in from the bush and the young lads, instead of working for the good of the tram department, have made themselves obstructions to tramway inspectors. And as if they are the only ones to regulate tramway traffic. Now this developed into something from the tramways people to the Commissioner of Police. I regret to have to bring to your notice what is apparently a slight misunderstanding on the part of the pointsman in regard to tramways traffic. It would appear from the interpretations, page 5 and 6, clause 4 of the Traffic Act 1919 and regulations, that tramways are specifically exempted, and therefore there is no reason for any friction between the departments. Trams were exempt from the Traffic Act, so were trolley buses later on, which means the police had no control over them, and they could be regulated by the tramways inspectors rather than the police. But this led to much unpleasantness. On the 9th of May, the Police Commissioner wrote back, I desire to bring under your notice that your reading of the Traffic Act is not correct. I'm attaching herewith copies of several reports in connection with the matter, and he supports his view. There was a bit of an incident on or around the 12th of August. This is Joe Walker, Tramways Traffic Inspector. There'd been a bit of a hold-up, and he said, I blew my whistle to call the leading motorman's attention, at the same time holding up my hand to indicate him to stop where he was. No sooner had I done so, Sergeant Johnson of the police department rushed off the footpath and called out to me, here, you have no bloody right to be giving signals to traffic. You're interfering with the police, blowing your whistle and waving your arms. You get away from here while you have a chance. I won't allow you or anybody else to interfere with the work of the police. I'm in charge of traffic, and get away or I'll very soon fix you. And then he was foolish enough to repeat all that when he was talking to the motorman as he was driving home in a tram to his home. And of course the tramway people got to hear about it. And then later there was another letter to the Commissioner of Police in regard to sections of the Traffic Act, so I submit these do not apply to tramways. Said vehicle includes anything moving on the road other than tram motors, tram cars, railway locomotives and so on. And this advice is given me by the Solicitor General. Therefore, I think this is a point which should be cleared up, that the Traffic Act under no conditions whatsoever applies to tramways. If you have any doubts, see the Solicitor General. And eventually the police had to accept that, and they had to actually work together with the tramways people rather than taking over. But I've seen some other letters which looked as if the police weren't all that unhappy about it, because they would get letters complaining about something that happened with a tram, and you could say, well, that's nothing to do with me. See the tramways, they run the trams, so that went on okay. So
there were many funny incidents with poor pointsmen. I had a friend about 1948, young man, just bought an old car, which they all were, and the policeman had the problem that they didn't have an amber light. They didn't have anything flashing amber. They'd be going along, all of a sudden they'd put their hand up like that. Well, some of the cars in those days didn't have four-wheel brakes. And this particular car of my friend's had no brakes. He used to have to jam it in the gear. And he came back and regaled us at work about the wonderful look on this policeman's face as the car came slowly towards him and stopped this far off. And so the trams really were in the same boat. Tram stopping wasn't wonderful, basically. They often, if it was wet, they'd skid and all this stuff. So I would not want to be a policeman. 140, yeah.
So, later on in the 20s, opening of the Maylands tramway. Here's the notice from William Taylor, General Manager, same fellow who was writing all those letters to the police just a few years earlier, stating that on Wednesday the 7th, the Maylands tram line between Bridge Street City and Crawford Road, Maylands, will be open for traffic, and it actually, the tram started at 6:10 on that day, and pointing out that the routes would be numbers 32, 33 and 34, and you can get timetables from Head Tramway Office in Hay Street. And here are the fares now. From Bridge Street to Crawford Road, remember that first tramway in 1899, the fare was threepence. 1928, still threepence for the full fare from the city out to the end. Also notice that it was called Crawford Road at that stage. Ferguson was Crawford Road. That's around about the time it changed, as far as I can tell. Some of the tramway documents call it that, and some call it Ferguson. Yeah. So there was also a report on the day, and the official ceremony was going to take place on that particular day, and then there was somewhere other, here we are. There was a report in the West of what was said at the ceremony, and some 3 or 4 years ago, said the Minister, that's Minister for Railways, Mr J.C. Wilcock, some 3 or 4 years ago, many prophesied that the tramways were doomed and it would be no more use for them. Now they all agreed that trams were the best means of carrying people through the city and suburbs. The government had come to the conclusion that the day of the tram was not over by a long way. Now it's easy for us to look back. We realise now that this is actually the last new tram line that was built, the Maylands one. There were other extensions from time to time, but Maylands one went up to destination number 34, and the only number higher than that was used was number 35, which was the extension of the Vic Park line out to the munitions factory at Welshpool during the war. So although they said they had a good future, it turned out that they didn't really. Many of the speakers also mentioned that what's needed was another bridge between the Causeway and Guildford, and I think Garrett Road Bridge came along in about 1935. So that wasn't there. So that's why you naturally take the opportunity to speak up if you're on your feet with an audience and you say these things. And special tributes were paid to the activity of Mr. Clydesdale in securing the tramway for Maylands. Now that's a significant name due to what followed. Because, let's have a look at the map first. Now this is actually a composite map. It shows how the Maylands tramway finished up. Started down here in Bridge Street, just north of the railway line, double track up Stirling Street, Newcastle, Lord Street, double track as far as the subway, but then initially it was single track and there was a loop there between Ellesmere and First Avenue, another loop there near 4th Avenue, and another loop over there near 7th and 8th Avenue. And this other section didn't become double track until some time later on. So that's what it looks like. Now this, I didn't point out before, that's where the original tramway power station was in the days of the company. Then the new powerhouse was built over there, and this yard was still owned by the tramways. They used that for Perway rails and things like that to store those things. But no sooner had that Maylands tramway being opened, letters started appearing in the West Australian. I, like the majority of local residents, am at a loss to understand why this section of the community should be deprived of the right to reach the Esplanade by tram, as in the past, because now it's stopped. Instead of going over the bridge, it stopped at Bridge Street. Is there anything more embarrassing to the average housewife and mother than, after completing her shopping, having to drag her parcels and probably one or two children for nearly half a mile before she can catch her train? And so they had meetings, they had public meetings. There's a report in the West on the 14th of May and the 20th of May. And they had deputations to the Minister saying the facilities were now worse than before the extension of the line to Maylands, because they're saying all of the people in this original Lord Street section now couldn't get on the tram because it was already full of people coming from Maylands by the time it got there. So that was one of the things. And also, now it stopped at the railway line instead of going right down. And when they got out there, it was in the middle of a dangerous road and there was cars going in both directions. So there were more meetings in June and another report here in July. And there are reports of delegations and various things. And Mr. Clydesdale, who I mentioned, eventually was forced to admit, he was the one who agreed to the tramway proposal on behalf of the Maylands people. He was forced to admit that 2 years before he had seen the plans for the tramway to stop there and approved them. And he'd been making a big fuss about this because now his constituents were making a fuss. And the tramways people said, well, firstly, we wanted to do it this way because we really need to remove some of the tram traffic from Beaufort Street. And because this turn into this part of Newcastle Street was very dangerous, they removed that little bit of track in there. And because if we stop them there, we need 2 less trams and 3 less crews to operate the service. If we make them go down to the jetty again, it costs too much, it's not economical. Why did you agree with it before? And Clydesdale said, oh well, we thought if we pressed that point earlier, you wouldn't build the tramway. So that's how it happened. So they didn't give in, but what they did was build a little terminal at the side of the road where the tram stopped there. That wasn't there originally, but that was just to get the tram out so that people could get off and on right next to the footpath instead of in the middle of the road.
Next to Cobber Copyrights was the chap there. But they made one slight error. Now, one of the points that for a young male travelling on a tram was you didn't want to sit down. You wanted to stand in the outside,
yes,
in the back, and it was very manly, particularly in the foreting. And if you were very clever, you would look as though you'd paid your fare. Particularly when he came out and said, "Fez please," and you'd look at him like that, and he'd go away. So a lot of the kids would do that, but when they put that extension through, just as it swings round, you see where it swings round parallel with the street there, there was a steel pole, and I think it had something to do with the line, and it'd been well worn when I saw it, but one kid put his head out and bashed it and got killed there. Now, I don't know why. He might have been calling out to someone because, you know, there was no fetish about safety.
No, there wasn't.
Because they so I always remember that particular thing. I liked it because there's copyright there and the easy walk, but they should have moved the pole.
I've got some pictures of that a little bit later on.
Yeah.
I'll show you. There was only a single tram connecting there as well. So when the trams were coming out from the car line to take up service, what they did was they would come up Barrack Street, over the bridge, around here, past Rose Street, and there was a crossover there. They would then change the poles over, come back down here, on that side of the road, come back there to the middle of the bridge, change the poles over again, and then head out over in that direction to the line. And then, of course, they could still go back there again if they wanted to as well. Quite easy to get back to the car line. You just come through and do a left turn, no problem there. But it's another indication of how tight funds were with the tramway company, because these other points here wouldn't have been used very often per day, because once the trams were out here, they stayed there for the rest of the day. They stayed like that for a long time, until in fact during the war, when the trams on their return journey came here to stop to change ends again, the people in the railway signal box couldn't see the trams over here. So eventually, but not until 1942-43, they put in this more direct thing where the trams could come up here and directly go over there and around in that direction. But only because it was probably important for the war effort to do it at that stage. Then soon after, the tramways opened to Maylands with all those fine words about the future of the tramways is good. The Depression came along. Tram number 130 turned out to be the last tram that was built for Perth. That's a picture of it much later on. Although they came out in a sort of green and cream colour, it wasn't quite the same arrangement. That's quite a nice picture of it there. I thought we've got to get some colour pictures in here somehow. That's how they looked originally. They had that diamond on the front when they first came out. But of course, what happened was trolley buses came along, and they were cheaper to install. You had the overhead wires, and there were two of them, but you didn't have all the traffic, and you'd have to maintain the road as well. So that was a lot cheaper for the tramways to some extent, and they were a lot smoother. But on the other hand, again, they didn't hold as many people as the trams.
But they did stop on the curbside before the tram did, which was extremely dangerous. A number of people were killed going around the tram.
Yeah, that's right. So there were pluses and minuses in both.
One of the big complaints about it came from drivers, because you weren't allowed to pass the tram if it stopped. And consequently, driving along those Perth roads was a nightmare, because you'd see the tram coming up to a stop, so you'd speed past it if you could. Because if you got behind it, you couldn't move till the tram stopped. To hop again.
Well,
a lot of complaints from drivers.
I don't know. Those things might have changed, but I've seen letters from the 1930s from the police saying that apart from the city block, if you were coming up behind a tram that stopped, you couldn't go that way because of people. You could actually go around that way past. So that was earlier on anyway. They were allowed to.
There were too many people ducking behind the tram and getting killed by oncoming traffic.
Yeah, not much chance of that.
There was. I saw it. I knew it.
Midland Junction Workshops, they built the bodies of many of the trolley buses up there. Here's a scene in St George's there. That's still there, the Palace Hotel. There's not quite the same surroundings these days. That's the terminus of the Leadville tram line there at Palace Hotel. And of course there were these useful things in the Netherlands Terrace as well.
I find out that as soon as we come to Perth, we had to get Dad to take us down there. Dungeon.
Modernly equipped Perth was. Also, there are getting to be lots of local cinemas, so all the big cinemas in Perth went to great lengths to attract people to come in. So there are quite a lot of different things. This is the Ambassadors, and it's a double bill, so they had a bogey tram with the greater length to put it on there. Don't know where they drove them around, but I've seen quite a lot of photos of that sort of thing. And we think all over advertising on buses and things is a new development. Clearly it's not. That's the trolley buses in front of the university. We're in the Claremont tram line. This is the tram overhead in the back on the south side of Stirling Highway, right in front of the university. And they were able to take up these tram lines. That's what they used to extend the double track on the Maylands route, because that tram line had only been in use for a few years before they took it up again. And I'm sort of going quickly through a few things here. A lot of things happened during the war. One of them was that they painted the diamonds white and put a sort of shield over the headlight, because there was a very real fear of air raids and things like that. And in the book, there's a lot more information about what they did in the war to the tramways and other things. Then later on again, more modern trolley buses came along, but in a lot of ways they weren't as convenient, because the earlier versions, of which there were 40 looking more or less like this, you could have used these for one-person operation, because you could have got in there and paid your money to the driver. And in the 50s, one of the things that killed the trams and trolley buses were labour costs. And they didn't want to have a driver and a conductor. But with these, you had to have a conductor as well as the driver. So it was really a retrograde step, rather than having the forward entrance in front of the wheels. Which of course is what the more modern buses do. So in a way it looks more modern, but actually it's a bit of a throwback having that entrance arrangement, and it turned out not to be a good scheme. Remember the Marching Girls? That's the closure of the North Perth tramway, Ango Street. And number 22 there. And one of these people, I think she said that was her there, came and bought a copy of the book last week, and I had a chat to her and gave her a few other photos of Marching Girls, because they seem to crop up at formal occasions like tramway closures and all sorts of other tramway occasions. And of course Rigby had something to say about the trams, and we got permission from Marlene Rigby to use this. And she's saying, there was a time when I considered myself lucky if I caught the last tram. They didn't have a high opinion of the trams.
What was the name of the last tram? The Rattler.
Yes, indeed. Yes. But there was also a generic name for a lot of them too, wasn't it? Where's this?
It's a terminus.
It's a terminus. When they replaced the number 18 tram along Beaufort Street, they extended it up past Grand Prom, and this was the terminus, and Chisholm College is just about here at the moment. So that's the Bedford line.
That's a circular tram.
Yeah, it's a circular, a loop, which you had to have for trolley buses in some way or other to get them around there. So all of the tram lines that were ever built, and they didn't all exist at the same time because some of them were closed before others were built, but down to Claremont, and you also had the Bayview Terrace line, which started from the Claremont station and went down Bayview Terrace and around the river for a bit. And the Claremont line came around there. I mentioned passing loops before. That Claremont line around Bayview Terrace and Stirling Highway was all single track and had about 7 or 8 passing loops on it. So of course the trams would have to get there and wait for the next tram to get to the loop, and it must have been very difficult to keep things going to time. South Perth tramways, haven't said anything about those, but they came down on Canning Highway and went over there, down to the baths down here and also up to the ferry terminal there, so you had service going like that and another local shuttle service going up and down.
It must have made a big difference to South Perth because they were always furious they missed out on the train. So at least they had some transport.
Yes,
public transport.
that's right. And it worked much better when they connected it up to the ferry, because coming up here and then catching the ferry and then a tram was still much quicker than catching the tram all the way around there, especially on a busy day. That was a lot of single track and passing loops as well, so that must have been pretty difficult to work. But that tram line was a lot more popular in the summer weekends because everyone would go down to the baths at Como, as indeed they did to the Netherlands baths as well, because in the early years of last century you couldn't really get to the ocean beaches too conveniently.
South Beach, you could, if you're in Maylands and you're near the station.
Oh yes, the train would
do anywhere else, just
yeah.
South Beach. But
yeah. But a lot of those places weren't so convenient for the train. And the trams finished up in caravan parks, or that's the quarry in Narrogin. Not sure what they've been doing with them, but they finished up with some tram bodies there.
farms
and things as well, quite a lot of them. The MTT took over, and there's a whole lot of trams down at Barrack Street Jetty. That's what they look like inside, just as a reminder for those people who used to be on the ultra comfortable wooden seats.
And you flick those seats over to face the other way when they went to go back on the line.
Yep, when you get to the terminus.
There was a particular sound as the conductor walked along, just flick them all.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite
Or you might have been allowed to do it yourself. That's just a reminder for those who remember what the driving position looked like. The driver had a moulded or somewhat tapered wooden seat, and
a little bell down for his foot.
yes,
That's like a bell.
a couple of the trams had leather seats. This is one of them. This is number 88. So they're number 88. 84 had them first, but 84 was scrapped and they transferred the seats to 88. And there was a notice about not lighting of the front platforms. And I'll just go through all of this. Possibly one other important thing that I should mention, that during the war there was almost a tram service branching off the existing Maylands one going down Peninsula Road, and it was approved by the Tramways Department, it was approved by the Minister, and they got up to the stage of saying, in order to do this, we're not going to run any extra trams, so now only half as many are going to run out to Ferguson Street. Half of them are going to turn off and go down Peninsula Road instead. And as soon as that became apparent, they decided, I think, oh, actually, that's not such a good idea.
I think it was a 20-minute service.
Yeah, it would have been a 40-minute service with that. So they ran a motor bus down there as well. There were just a few motor buses around during the war. Okay, to finish up, here is a little scenic tour of the Lord Street and Maylands tramway. But bear in mind that the scenic part is really this end of it. It's not so scenic near Ferguson Street. But the first, we should actually go back there. When the trams first started, their terminus in Barrack Street was at the Esplanade, or they also called it Weld Club. That's where they went to and from. So the Lord Street service originally was started and finished up there around about the Weld Club. Around about 1906 they extended the tram track, again just did a single track, down to the jetty to meet up with the ferries. And they may have been partly encouraged to do that because the South Perth Ferry Company started running buses up and down Beaufort Street that passengers would get on and go down to the ferries. So the tramway company didn't think that was such a good idea, and so they pretty soon extended their line down. And then the buses had to stop because they weren't paying anything to the Perth City Council, so the Perth City Council preferred the trams to run and get their 3% from it. So there you can see the Esplanade and some nice views over Perth there. Here's a view in the other direction, taken from the Town Hall Tower, looking down. It's not very high resolution, but you can pretty much see what happens. There's the thing going down there. Very close, and no doubt this is why the Lord Street people still wanted to come down to the jetty. Not that that was still there by that time, but that was the original City Baths over there in front of the Esplanade, so that's quite close to where the trams finished. And not far away, over the other side of the Esplanade at the foot of William Street, was the White City amusement park, which went until about 1929. It was run by the Ugly Men's Association, raising money for charities, and the tram line around Nuts Bay Road came along there. I can almost persuade myself I can see the tram lines there, but they were there. So that was quite popular, but the Perth City Council thought that perhaps the people who went there were a bit undesirable in some ways. So they closed it down, and a little bit after that, Sydney Atkinson's Motors moved over there, which is no doubt a much better use for it. So still looking at the Lord Street line, not sure if these are definitely Lord Street cars, but this is where they would have gone. That's the old Treasury building. That's still there, and I've heard they're planning to build some enormous construction behind it, or in the middle of it, or something.
Hotel, I think it's going to be.
So I'm not sure if that's...
Have you counted the cross arms on that telegraph pole?
No.
All the cups?
There's a lot, yeah. Yes, they had a bit of visual pollution. So there's the Barrack Street. I wouldn't have called that. Barrack Street bridge with some trams on it. And there's that railway signal box that's on the diagram before there. Yeah, it's a bit quieter. The thing that's interesting, and it's probably worth reflecting on, I mean, these people are standing there having a chat. And I did say there were traffic problems in Barrack Street. Not at that stage, obviously. They really came in the 20s.
They had a little white disc they had to stand on. That was the position.
They did, and the trams going in opposite directions couldn't go through the intersection at the same time. Right. One would have to go, and then another one would come the other way. They couldn't go in both directions through the intersection, which was good for safety, but held up the tram traffic a bit more. Now, this is, I think, the only one we've been able to identify. That is actually a Lord Street tram, getting passengers there, and so it's unusual to get even as clear a shot as that from so early on.
I think the bike's winning.
I think it is, yes. And that would appear to be tram car number 6 again, that we saw at the beginning of the Subiaco line as well. So that means that really must be quite early, because they rebuilt those trams at some stage. Coming along a little bit further, as far as I can make out, that building is still there, or part of that, and that one. This is in Beaufort Street, just a couple of blocks north, and that should be the Court Hotel. and that should be that building which was the police building and is now part of the art gallery. It looks like it to me. From what I've read, this was called the Alexander Scotch College, and it's where Trades Hall now is. And this sign here, although you can't read it on this projection, it says Bedford Ladies College. I don't know anything about that, but they had a sign next to the Alexander Scotch College, which eventually did lead to the Scotch College that's over now in Swanbourne. And remember that map earlier with that single track leading over for the Lord Street tram? This is in 1919, tram car number 26, making that turn between Brisbane Street and Beaufort Street and heading out, well, which it might be coming back. It's not really clear. That could be a monument in the front heading in this direction. I've never really been able to make out whether it is. I need to get a high resolution picture to really be sure. But anyway, that is actually on the Lord Street tram line. So that's as far as we can go along there with the Lord Street trams, but here's the new terminus at Bridge Street. And there is the tram right next to the side of the road. Here's Cobbler's Lottery and Book Store, something or other.
And you can see the pole.
That one?
No, the other
The
one.
one at the other end, that
That's
one.
it.
Oh, yes. Yes, you're still very close
You're
to the
swinging
edge.
in, you
Yes.
practically swing around.
Yeah.
Or you did swing in, I keep thinking.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
And next to it is the Railways Accounts Department, that building there. And now, of course, that's in the middle of the road, because now Rose Street goes straight across, whereas previously Rose Street and around like that over to Bridge Street. And I believe Bridge Street is still there, but sort of underneath where...
If you see where Cobbler's Lottery and Bookstop, that's Cobber Rights, if you just were to put your back against that and walk forward 5 paces, you'd fall down the air raid shelter.
Ah,
That's what the air raid shelter was. I don't know how many people were supposed to get into it. They did have them covered, there were openings to both ends, made of solid jarrah.
yep. One of the complaints that they originally had about when the tram stopped here was that it was dangerous because of all the traffic. And so they said, well, we'll put it over here and we'll put in a crosswalk to help people get across the street safely. And of course,
Straight across.
there's the
That's
crosswalk.
it. That's it, yeah.
That's quite a good safety feature.
They couldn't see you when they came around the bend.
Yes. So there's another view of the tram that's got its white diamond from in the war, rather worn off at that stage by the look of it. There's a look from the other end, and there's a look with a couple of trams in Beaufort Street. Looks like that's one of the small cars and one of the bogey cars. And there's an advertisement for Totterdell for the mayoral election. And finally, here's another one. You can see coming around from Stirling Street, the two tracks come together and then goes over towards the side of the road over there. There's another sort of kiosky thing.
That was going down to the railway.
Going down to the railway thing on the other side of the road there. Before we get away from here completely, here's that number 62 that we saw originally. To get back to the car barn, the trams would come along Barrack Street and do a left turn up Murray Street to head east towards the car barn, and that's what that's doing. We've got written number 32 there, but it's heading up Murray Street. So, round the corner, Stirling Street, Sunday Times, Coffee Palace, that building's still there last time I looked. This was another lot of markets. I said there were quite a few. There were also some markets in Wellington Street on the other side of the railway line, which was there at one stage. So there were quite a lot of markets around the place, but there are some more of them. Shaftesbury Hotel, a little bit further up in Stirling Street. And I think that's the Shaftesbury Hotel still there, but it loses the impact a bit, doesn't it, with the car park built there. Oh, and there's trolley bus overhead. So later on, the trolley buses coming to Perth used to go along that bit of Stirling this is a bit of a puzzle really. It just says it's a tramway stoppage. It's in Stirling Street during the tramway stoppage on Saturday morning, and you can see a lineup of cars going around the corner into Bridge Street, people getting off. I'm not sure what the stoppage was though, because it said one tram's just arrived, so it can't be a power stoppage because they couldn't have arrived if there was no power. So whether it was a strike or something, I don't know. And I don't have a date.
One of the things that I was wondering, as far as the technical side of the, when was the first one came out in the first tram? When was it?
Opened in 1899.
Okay, well, around that time, there was a lot of controversy in the world, particularly in America, with the development of power. And there was two opposing people. One was Tesla, who had invented, and did everything about AC power. And he was opposed by, what's his name there?
Probably Edison.
Edison, who was not a particularly good inventor, irrespective of what anyone else says. He was an advocate for DC, and throughout America he wanted to put in power for New York from the Niagara power station a mile apart using DC, and only the wealthy could use it. He had a lot of favour, whereas Tesla had got backing from a very famous millionaire, and he was going to put in AC, which could have stretched a long way. They actually went through a long time of argument, and Edison put out an enormous amount of publicity saying how dangerous AC was, to the extent where they had an elephant and electrocuted it with AC to show what could happen. And consequently, now this is quite amazing when you think about it, but essentially around that time there was a huge argument about AC, so many of these things that came around that time were DC. And it was only in about 1910 and on, they suddenly realised that that was a lot of lies. AC was just as good and cheaper, and didn't need the power station.
By which time they'd already started doing it.
They'd already started building on AC. And now what that meant was, as you were going along, and particularly being like me, a young man standing in the back, which was the favourite position, of course, they had a circuit breaker in there. Now the circuit breaker consisted of a box about that